Okay, anyway, so we'll see what these slides say. I put these together before we went off to Oregon, and I do know this. We're going to look at another psalm today. So this will be something of discovery. And this particular psalm addresses the fact of fear. This is a nice kind of subjective picture of what fear looks like. And when we talk about fear in our culture, you know, your best friends sometimes give you the worst advice in terms of how to deal with fear. Now, fear in itself is not wrong because God built us instinctively to watch out when something fearful happens close to us. You know, this is fear, kind of flight or fight reaction. So that's really not wrong. But what I'm talking about is what happens after fear arises in your heart. How do you deal with that? How do you put it in its right place? Sometimes people will say something like this, you know, never let your fear decide your future. But I'm still scared to death, so what do I do? So most of the best advice in the world is, well, you just need to sort of get over it, and you need to not let it control you, and everything will be okay. But when you're in the middle of the things that are causing you to fear, that's just bad advice. In this psalm today, we have good advice about what you do in the presence of fear. I mean, really good advice. So we're going back to the Psalms. Remember, I've been going through the Psalms, the old songs of Israel, old songs, jukebox. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, these are my top 5 psalms for the year. Ones that I kind of grown towards this year. I don't know why. We've looked at 125. We did that in the park last month. Psalm 110, crazy messianic psalm, really something. Psalm 133 we did last time we did this. And today we're going to look at Psalm 46. It has one of the most famous phrases in the Old Testament in it. But we'll quote the phrase all the time. We'll put it on refrigerator magnets on our refrigerator. We'll write it, you know, on the little note cards to people, but we don't really know the context of it. And the context of it is deep and profound fear. So what is the phrase? You'll see it. You'll recognize it when we get there. By the way, we're going to play it since it's a song. We have our play buttons up here. And these play buttons, the far left button is the...
No. Backward.
It's the stop button. It's the stop. Wow. Thanks. Come on. Are we here today? Are we here? Okay. And then the far right button is the far right button.
Play button.
Well, in this case, it'll be the sing button because we're going to sing these psalms. These are songs. The psalms are songs. And by the way, we can get great aid from what the lyrics are. And the middle button is?
Mute.
Well,
Mute.
Pause in Hebrew in the psalms is Selah. So we've got a three verse song that has Selahs between them. We'll pause at every Selah. We'll go back. We'll look at the lyrics because in the lyrics, although it's a song, these lyrics are not throwaway lyrics. These lyrics reveal some incredible truth about our relationship with God. By the way, I was laughing as I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago, is that if, you know, we look back on these famous songs, the lyrics of these famous songs, and we gain truth out of them because they're speaking truth in the lyrics. What would happen if some archaeologist, like 300 years from now, goes back and he checks out the lyrics on some songs that I loved when I was growing up, and they're trying to glean some kind of truth about who we were? You know, I've been in the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to get, you know, like, what? What is that? Okay, the Psalms are not like that. The Psalms have real content. They're not, I still don't know what that song means, by the way. No, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so let's do Psalm 46. Here we go. We're going to play Psalm 46. Psalm 46 has a header on it, and the header tells us something about who wrote it and what it's all about. Here's the header for Psalm 46. To the choir master, see, it's a song, of the sons of Korah, according to the Alamo, a song. According to the Alamo? No, according to Alamoth. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Not the Alamo, it's the Alamoth. Are you with me yet? There we go. Okay. So that's at the top of the psalm, and it tells us this is a song, and there's instructions there to the song choir master who's going to sing it. So, you know, if we knew the song melody, we could sing it, but do you guys know the melody of this? I don't know the key.
Can you start all over and
Get in the right key. See? Oh, good. We got wise guys here today. This is great. Okay, so here we go. We're going to look at the lyrics of the psalm. We start with stanza 1, and we hit the play button. It's actually sing. Here we go. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah, pause, reflect. So let's pause and reflect for a second. This is the first of three stanzas on fear. And he says right at the top something that kind of bugs me. We will not fear. Well, I'm going to fear. I mean, if something's, if there's troops marching down the street and they're coming to my house and they're going to take me away, I mean, I'm going to fear. But he's going to give us reasons for why we don't need to fear. Or put it this way. I said a natural response to a threat is fear. And you can't control that. When it comes up, boop, it's just there. But what you do with it after that is really determining. Many times we say, don't feed your fear. You know that phrase? So we're going to do something other than feed our fear. And we're going to counteract it with a knowledge of who God is. So this is what he says. God is our refuge, our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Therefore, we will not fear. Therefore, we will not fear. So what changes the circumstance isn't that the threat has evaporated. What changes the circumstance is that God is here. Okay? So what you have to do in the very first sense when there's threats around is to say, well, is God not here? And Satan is just a master when you're in bad situations to say, he's gone, buddy. I mean, he's out of here. He doesn't know what you're going through. Now this is Satan, not Jim talking. If he really loved you, would he let you go through this? God doesn't love you. It's like the Job argument is what it is. However, that's not true. What the psalmist says is, no, you got to remind yourself of this. God is our refuge and our strength. Now, refuge is a place you go to when there's trouble. It's a place that's safe for you. They had cities of refuge in the times of Israel. If you got caught up in, say, an accidental homicide, and so the families don't kill you without justice, you would run to a city of refuge, a place where you would be protected. So refuge is a place you can be protected, you can go to. God is the place we can go to, and he'll protect us. That's what being a refuge is. And when you're in that refuge then, especially in the cities of refuge at the time, when you go to a city of refuge, you are under the influence of the power of the people who run the city of refuge. I mean, what if they're a bunch of wimps? And they say, oh, sure, come on in. You can come to our city of refuge. By the way, we leave the doors open on our gates all the time, and anyone can come in and they'll hurt you. But yeah, come on in. So really, you're putting yourself in the hands of someone who's going to take care of you. Well, God is the one who is the strength of that refuge. So when you run to God, he's the strength of that refuge. He's the one that's going to protect the gates. He's the one that's going to be around you. So when God is our refuge and our strength, he's telling you where you need to go when you're in trouble. Where? To God. He's my refuge. He's my strength. He makes the refuge work. And he says he's a very present help in trouble. That is not a throwaway line. He's saying that when you're in trouble, God is there with you. So not only does he say, I'm a refuge for you to come to, but he says, once you get here and you're in the refuge, who is me, God says, I'm there, right there with you. He says, pull up a chair, pats the chair, you sit down. He says, I'm right here with you. Now, see, this is against the satanic lie. The satanic lie is God's left you. And God's saying right here, well, no, actually, I'm very present. I'm with you. But the lie and the circumstance makes it look like God has abandoned us. Now, the question at this point, when he's writing this, therefore we will not fear. Therefore, because we know who God is and who we can run to, we don't fear. That has changed the whole equation of the threat. You see that? So when people say, well, you'll get through this, that's really bad advice in a sense. What you need to say is, well, God's much bigger than this threat. Do you remember that? And then you start to walk into the refuge of who God is. And he's present with you. Therefore, we will not fear. Now, how big a problem can this bromide fix? Okay? What if an asteroid hits the earth? And all those asteroid, apocalypse movies. Do you go and stand on the beach and wait for the wave to hit? How big an apocalypse can this cover? Is this just for slight problems or for big problems? And that's where in the next verse, he goes big time in the exaggeration realm to tell you, no, this works for something even bigger than you can imagine. How big? Well, it's enough. It's even though, therefore we will not feel, even though, and he gives us 4 of those, though the earth gives way, that's an earthquake. Or an opening crack in the ground and you fall in. Though the earth give way, this works. Though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, we're all gonna die. Though, how much bigger? Though its waters roar and foam. That's what they do after the mountains plop in the sea. they roar and foam. What, though, how big? Though the mountains tremble at its swelling, the swelling of the water from the mountains dropping into the sea. So he uses this really over-the-top language to say, we will not fear even if the whole universe and the earth is falling apart. Now, the question at that point is any of the problems that you're fearing bigger than those? No. No. And that's what he's trying to say at the outset of this song. Your problems which cause you to fear, they're real, they're not imaginary, and yet God is near. He's your refuge. He's your strength. Even if this was happening, he would still be that, and he'd still be strong against it. If your world's not falling apart like this, then God's sufficient to be your refuge. That's what he's saying right here. You know, we have many times I wander into exaggeration when I tell stories, especially if they're about me. Well, he's wandering into exaggeration in a real way. He's saying your God is so much bigger than your problems. So much bigger than your problems. Even if this was happening around you, he would still be your refuge and strength. Yeah. So, when fear comes upon you because the threats are real, your next step is, what do I do next? Ask yourself the question, where do I run? Run into the refuge who is God himself, who has the strength to protect you in the midst of that. He'll care for you there. That's stanza number 1. I will not fear. I will not feed that fear, but I will allow that initial fear to cause me to run into the refuge who's God himself. By the way, there's two prerequisites for why God is a good refuge. Number 1, he's very powerful. That's a good prerequisite. That's the strength part. Number 2, he loves you tremendously. He loves me. He's very powerful. Hey, I will choose not to feed my fear. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, let's go to the second stanza. Second stanza in Psalm 46 goes like this. Sing. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Oh, now we're getting down to the meat. However, you are probably confused by that first line in verse 4. Yeah, see, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. What? Okay, this becomes more clear when you understand he's speaking from an old tactical military approach to taking over cities. He's speaking about a city that's under siege by enemies right here. That's the image that's in his mind. So, if you go to a city, think of Jericho, for instance. Jericho, when Joshua and the nation of Israel came to it, they looked at it and said, man, this is encircled by an impossible wall. An impossible wall. There's just no way anyone can actually make it through that wall. But the strategy you use when you have a walled city is a siege. You basically surround it. And when you surround it, nothing goes in, nothing goes out. You better hope you have food. You better hope you have water, because they're just going to sit outside the wall and wait for you to die from hunger and thirst. That's a siege. Now, many times our problems are so long-lasting, it seems like a siege. And that's what he's trying to get at here. I mean, they encompass us. They seem to be around us. There's no way in. There's no way out. It's hopeless. It lasts so long that I'm going to die of lack of water and food. Sometimes the problems seem that long. And so he's talking to this siege mentality, the siege mentality that causes you to fear. However, still, that opening line in the second stanza doesn't make sense. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. So let's find out what he's talking about. Can you do a little history this morning? Oh, no. We're sunk. Okay, thanks, Pam. Okay, let's look at these streams for a second. I'm going to take you to this picture right here. This is a recreation picture of what ancient Israel, ancient Jerusalem looked like. Jerusalem, when David settled it, looked like just a finger of a hill. It was just this finger right here of the hill. And that today is called the city of David. You can't see that geography well today because a lot has been filled in on the left and right of that hill, but it's a hill. Back before, actually after David, during the time of David, the Canaanites, before they took over this area, this was called Jebus, the Jebusites lived here. Before that, they realized that this was not only a great defensible thing because, soldiers have to go up the hill and then they got to get through the wall. I mean, it's really defensible, but it also had its own water supply. However, there was a problem with the water supply at Jebus, which became Jerusalem, and it's this. The Gihon Spring right here, water bubbles out of the ground on the side of the hill right there. And it's outside, classically, the wall that you could defend the city. So they had to actually build walls around the spring itself, so if you had bad guys come in, you could still get water out of there. But that water is the life spring of Jerusalem. And without that water, everybody dies during a siege. Well, not only that, but at the Canaanite times, they built a tunnel down the side of the hill right here, and they brought it out, and they irrigated this very flat, fertile area, which is actually now the Kidron Valley, right here. They would fertilize right there, and they'd bring this water there, and so if your bad guys came into town, they could just sit at the bottom of the hill and have all the water they want. Not only that, but they could eat everything you're growing down there as well. So about the time of the Assyrians, a great king by the name of Hezekiah came up with a plan. He says, what we need to do is we need to at least block off the water that goes to Kidron Valley. So if we get surrounded by the Assyrians, they're not going to take advantage of the water. So this is exactly what he did. He blocked it up. And when the bad guys came in, they couldn't take advantage of that water. But then, of course, there's a problem right there. Even though the Canaanite tunnels have been blocked and the water out there is blocked, and you can read this more about this. I'm summarizing from these passages here. But he blocks the water. We still have a problem. And the problem is you still need water in Jerusalem. And it's still just mildly protected by these very small walls. So even though you're not watering the enemy, you still got to figure out how to water yourself. So many times they would come in, they'd surround the area, and they realized that all they had to do is put enough soldiers on the Gihon Spring that you would basically cause Jerusalem to thirst to death, right? Wouldn't be water. So Hezekiah, several centuries before Jesus, comes up with a great plan. He says, I know what we need to do. I know. We need to somehow get that water to be inside the walls of the city. That way, if we have a siege from the king of Assyria, we'll be able to survive it. Well, how do you bring that water inside when it actually is at the elevation halfway up the hill? It's a technical problem. So what he did, and this is great, if you cut away that part of the city, what they decided to do was to cut an underground channel from the Gihon Spring over to the lowest part of town, which is down here on the left. And that actually, what you see on the left of that pool, that's inside the city wall. There was more city wall that was built after that. So then suddenly, the Gihon Spring is pumping water into that pool, inside the city, inside the wall. What a great plan. But what you got to do is dig a tunnel. I mean, a long tunnel, like a 5 football field long tunnel. And you have to figure out how to do that. This pool, by the way, is known in Jesus' time as the Pool of Siloam. Remember the blind guy? John 9, Pool of Siloam. So the water that goes in the Pool of Siloam by the time of Jesus is going underground in this tunnel that Hezekiah cut from the Gihon Spring to the pool on the side. So how did they do that? Well, you can't see that too well. It's kind of dark. They decided to cut it from 2 directions at once because they were out of time. They needed 2 groups, so they decided to cut it from the Pool of Siloam side as well as from the Gihon Spring side, and they would cut into the rock underneath Jerusalem, and then they would meet, and everyone would be happy. The question is how do you do that? How do you do that? That's just crazy stuff. And not only that, this tunnel can't have any slope to it because, for instance, if it slopes downhill from the Gihon Springs, then as you're digging the tunnel, the Gihon Spring will fill it up and you'll drown inside. So you have to block the water. Plus, you want to be able to have this whole tunnel be relatively level through its entire movement. So you got to not only make sure these 2 guys work toward each other, find each other, but then when they find each other, that the level of the tunnels is the same. This is a big deal. But this will save their lives when the Assyrian king comes into town and surrounds them. So they did this. By the way, if you go to Jerusalem, you can walk through this tunnel. And here's a picture of us walking through that tunnel. Those are my daughters in front. There's the Kramers behind there. And you can't see it, but Dorothy's back here, right there. And someone's doing this behind Barry's head. I don't know if that was it you? Someone's back. Anyway. Yeah, that's the tunnel right there. And in fact, they're standing right here. This is a replica of what was carved into the side of the wall where the two tunnels met. When the two tunnels met, they decided to carve into the wall in Hebrew what they just accomplished and why and who, or Hezekiah and stuff like that. They've since taken that very historical piece of the wall out and put it in the Israel Museum, but they put a replica right there. So when you get to that spot, you realize this is where these guys met. They met each other by listening through the rock. And they kept the level by having some water come into the tunnel, so they were always standing in ankle-deep water. And the water itself was their level. Yeah, it's kind of clever. But Anne's kind of claustrophobic. That's why she's making that face right there. Yeah. Okay, so
Jimmy,
yes.
behind Anne, I think that is
Joan and Barry Kramer. Yep. Okay, so here it gets completed. The length of it, like I said, is about 5 football fields. The whole angle of flow of the tunnels over that 500 yards or so is about 18 inches. So they did a really good job. It was put in place before the king of Assyria came and surrounded the city. And so by the time the siege started from Assyria, they were saying to themselves, isn't it great that we have water inside the walls of our city? We are thankful for this stream in the midst of the threat. Are you getting there yet? Getting there yet? There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. And that's what he's saying. If you feel like you're in a siege mentality with your problems, do you know that you have a source of life that's unseen to the people who are afflicting you? And they cannot control it. That's what that phrase means. So in the midst of the problems in life, you have a stream of life flowing into where you are. And it can't be controlled, and it's invisible to everyone else. That's what he's getting at. The river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. By the way, this is the place where God lives with us. God is in the midst of her. So in a siege mentality, God is still in your midst. He said that in the first verse. God's in your midst. He's not far away, hoping that you get through it. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. So morning dawns is a siege mentality phrase. Like, I hope we just get through tonight, and then when morning dawns, we'll see how it looks. That's a siege mentality. So really what you need to say in the middle of your problems that seem to be chronic, they're long-term, they surround me, I can't escape them. You need to look at that and say, okay, I know God's with me. I know I'm in God as a refuge. I know that he's got the strength to deal with this. But also, I understand that God brings water, he brings life in the midst of this circumstance. It's not just getting by. He's going to feed me and water me. I get everything I need for life from God in the midst of this. So that from a siege perspective, that's like miraculous. That's miraculous. But then to kind of emphasize, again, what he's saying right here, he goes on in the rest of this particular thing. This is how I just paraphrase it. I have a source of life that my enemies can't control. That's what that first phrase means. Right? A river, the streams that make glad the city of God. Okay, so this is how he goes on and emphasizes it. He says, when you're in a siege, another thing happens, and you've seen this if you've seen some Monty Python movies. Holy Grail, was it? No, it wasn't Holy. Yeah, it was Holy Grail. Yeah, where when someone's on top of the wall and they shout at each other during a siege, and they shout at each other, "You're all gonna die. You have no hope." "Oh, that's not true. We have a river you can't see." "Well, I don't think so." So there's always in a siege there's an opportunity to yell things at each other. So he's talking about this right here. This is the siege yelling. The nations rage. They rage. "Ah, you're all gonna die." And here's the result: when the nations rage, compared to when God utters his voice. So let's see what happens when the nations rage. Is it productive for them? Well, when the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. Doesn't do them any good. They rage all they want. Their kingdoms are going to go away. But when God speaks, he utters his voice and the earth melts. So it's a great contrast. Isn't it nice to know you have a refuge and strength that when he speaks, the earth melts? I think that's much more powerful than whatever you're surrounded by in your problems. Yeah, the earth melts. So again, he's using this, exaggeration a little bit, but it's really not exaggeration. In a real sense, the nations may rage and say whatever they want to say against you, and you'll think, "Oh no, we're all going to die." But you know what? When God speaks, the earth melts, and he's on your side. So just chill. That's what he's saying right here. I love this. I love this psalm. And then he does the capping idea, and this is great. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. That's another way of saying the first entry line. The Lord of hosts is with us. Now, he's not using just throwaway phrases when he says Lord of hosts. You know what Lord of hosts is supposed to bring to mind? Who are the hosts, by the way? Yeah, all the powers of heaven. The hosts, the heavenly hosts. Think about myriads upon myriads of angels, cherubim. We've been talking about cherubim at home a lot recently because we've been reading through Exodus. But that's it. When you say Lord of hosts, what it says, that host word is always used in terms of a commander in charge of a host of people who are in his army. So now you have the Lord, that's an authority word, the Lord, the commander of the hosts of heaven, on your side. And guess what? He's not out there commanding that host. He's with you. Yes. It's a great picture. The Lord of hosts is with us. And the God of Jacob is our fortress. Why the God of Jacob instead of the God of Israel? Or the God of, these all have specific reasons. When you see Jacob as the word to describe Israel, you're thinking about the human man Jacob, who ended up has his name changed to Israel. But Jacob, whenever you read Jacob, think of a human man who's got as many flaws as you, if maybe not more. And he's very well known as God tames him his early life as being kind of a scallywag, right? So this scallywag. So here's the God of the scallywag. Yay, team. That's that very human. Here's the God of Jacob. He's not just a wall and refuge. He's an impenetrable fortress. He's a fortress. Yeah! He's with us inside the fortress, and he's the fortress itself. I mean, it's the best thing ever. We're there. I love it. There's a third stanza. Let's do the third stanza. Okay, third and last stanza sort of goes like this. Beep. Okay, come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. That's the refrigerator magnet right there. Be still and know that I'm God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah, pause, reflect. Is he saying something new here? Well, he actually sort of is, and this is instructive. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. And then if you tie that together with this, verse 9, he makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. So, you may be in the middle of a tremendous battle that's causing you to fear because you realize your inadequacy to deal with the threat. That's where the fear comes up. But guess what? God himself is not just bigger than your current battle. Okay? God is bigger than warfare itself. He's not just good for the battle today. He's good for warfare, period. I mean, so much so that he'll make wars cease to the end of the world. I mean, he doesn't just go and intercede at some point in the history of mankind. He'll actually turn off warfare altogether. He has the power to do that. And it's not a matter of who's more powerful in the battle. God says, warfare's done. We're done with that. That's the kind of God you have. He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire, which, by the way, is impossible. Chariots are always bronze. But that's the kind of God we got. His fire is better than bronze. So here's a God who says, I'm with you. I'm your refuge. Come inside me. I'm your fortress. I'm your wall. I'm your strength. All these kind of things. And by the way, if he wants to, he can snap his finger and actually turn off the ability of anyone in the world to cause harm. And that's the God we have who loves and is just. He's bigger than warfare itself. Bigger than warfare itself. So, but then you say, well, wait a second. I'm in a terrible time right now. There is a battle around me right now. It causes me to fear. So if God can actually turn off warfare itself, why does he let me be in this conflict when he can go, no conflict? And that's a bigger question than we have a lot of time to talk about. But in short, Jesus says, in this world you will avoid tribulation. Oh, you are listening. In this world you'll have tribulation. There's a deliberateness to how God allows us to be exposed to the onslaughts of evil. But what did he say after that? Be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. So that changes the entire dynamic of the equation. That's what he's saying right here. God himself can actually and will eventually turn off warfare itself as a threat to you. But for a while, in ways that we don't always understand when we're in the midst of them, he allows us to go through them. And the point in going through them isn't just to get to the other side, is to go through them with him. This God who's near, this God who's my fortress, the God who's my strength. So it really affords a wonderful opportunity for you to start to understand the dynamics of God's love for you if you go through troubles. It would be so much nicer if God said to me, Jim, once you give your life to me, life will be smooth sailing, and you'll find comfort and joy in every moment of your life. And you know what kind of person I'd be at the end of that? I don't. Spoiled brat. Thanks, ma'am. That's it. Yeah, that's not the deal. But what he does say right here as well is, although he will intercede in your battles, and you can lean on him and let him be your refuge, he will eventually make warfare itself obsolete. So he is in control of the circumstance. That's what he's trying to say right here. I mean, it's just a great, large picture of God. And then he sticks this in, be still and know that I'm God. So why is this the right place to stick that phrase? Well, because when you're in the middle of a battle, you're seldom still. It's, the phrase we use is he's running around with his hair on fire. That's okay. That's not what we want right here. There's a way in which the threat itself, we are smart enough by the brains that God has given us. We see the threat, we look at our ability to deal with the threat, and we say, I am incapable of defending myself against this, and hence I fear. I mean, that's why fear comes on you. If you say, I got this, you're not going to fear. But you say, I don't got this, you fear. Well, in that whole equation, as we oft said before, where's God in that thinking? There's no thinking in that. I mean, all we're doing is we're saying this is bigger than me, and me is pretty puny, and so if it's left to my own devices, we're all going to die. So that's the problem. So where is God in all this? And that's why he stops right here and says, chill, be still. Not just be still. What you need to do is fill your head with who God is, not with the threats. Be still and know that I am God. Well, in the toughest position in life, I know God's God, but still I've got these problems. Let's get practical right here. No, you don't understand. Don't feed the fear. Don't feed the fear. What you need to do in your mind is you need to say, the fear is coming from a threat that's bigger than me. I'm smaller than the threat. But hey, I can also bring to mind the fact that God is bigger than the threat itself, and he's bigger than the warfare itself. And by the way, he's sitting next to me, and by the way, he's my refuge. And that changed the whole dynamic. So I can be still, but it takes being still to turn off the voices of the threat and remember who God is. And by the way, when you know that I am God, what he's really talking about in know is to put God in the place that he actually is in terms of exalted above everything. I mean, he's bigger than everything. Is he bigger than your problem? Yeah. Is he bigger than warfare? Yeah. He's bigger. So when we know that he's God, what we have to do basically is exalt who he is. Exalt just means that we're to lift him up. Now, we're not actually lifting up God's reputation. All we're doing is remembering that God's up there already. He's the guy that made the universe. He's the guy that created everything that's around us. He's the one who died on our behalf so that we might have, nearness to him. He's the one that's done all this stuff. So what you need to do is be still and know that he's bigger than everything. He loves you and he's capable. Just be still. I do this a lot when I talk to people, Dorothy too, when they come with problems. And these are real problems. People have real problems. We're not diminishing those. But when someone is completely immersed in their problems, you know what they do when you sit down with them and say, what's going on? And they give you a technicolor, widescreen view of the threat. I mean, and they'll paint it out to what it is, and then they'll paint it out to bigger than it is, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And somewhere along that line, you have to say, psst. So where's God in all this? What did I tell you about this? Where's God in all this? Is the problem the only thing on your radar? Do you think God is bigger than this problem? So really all we do is just try and remind people, just chill for a second. Let all those voices of the threat die down. Don't give ear to them. Who is God? Is God bigger than this problem? Is God bigger than the ability of problems to come on your doorstep? I mean, is God bigger than all that? Does God love you? Do you think God's going to engage with his power on your behalf because of his love? Of course he is. So let's just breathe in, breathe out, be still, and exalt God as the King of the universe that he is. Now that'll change the whole dynamic of your moment. That changes the equation of the threat. Now, the circumstance of the threat may not change instantly. There's no guarantee of that. But you are in a place all of a sudden you realize that this threat is not going to neutralize me for real. I've got God with me. He's my refuge. He's my fortress. He's my strength. He's bigger than all of that. So be still and know that I'm God. But he says, he adds to this, I will be exalted, God speaking the first person. I'll be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth. And the key to these two phrases right here is this, will be. I will be. Eventually, I will be exalted. Now, you might, in the midst of the problem, think that the persecutors are more powerful than you. You're going to stop and you're going to put God above them because that's where God is. But these jokers out here who are giving you these problems, who are following these satanic attacks, they have no respect for who God is. But what God says right here is, there's a day coming when they will exalt me. They will know that I'm doing this. That's also part of what happens in the taunting when under a siege from somebody. There's this idea, this proud, arrogant idea that we're in charge and we're on top of things and we got more chariots than you got and we're going to win and you're going to die. Ha, 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 ha. We are powerful. You know that kind of arrogance? One day they're going to be face to face with God and they'll have to exalt him above themselves. And that's all he's saying right here. Someday the tables will turn. So don't worry about it. It'll happen. I will be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the entire earth. Remind you of these phrases right here. Philippians, Paul writes to the Philippian church, therefore God has highly exalted him, where he actually is, and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Someday everyone will finally say, yep, Jesus is the guy. And another place that actually is the foundation for that comes out of Isaiah 45:22. So turn to me, this is God speaking, turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth. For I'm God and there is no other. By myself I have sworn, from my mouth has gone out in righteousness a word that shall not return. And that word is this, to me every knee shall bow, every tongue shall swear allegiance. Eventually, there will be no doubt in all of humanity's mind about the authority of God himself. Does it mean that they'll put their life in his hands and trust him? Not necessarily, but there will come a time where his power and his authority will be so obvious, there's no way you can say, well, I'm not sure he's really God. Yeah, I guess he is. Yeah, he will be exalted. Okay. I forget what happens after this. Oh, the last verse of the song is what happens after this. He just repeats with this because these are two very important concepts when you're in fear. The Lord of hosts is with us. The Lord, and you know what I do in a serious situation, and I do this, you think I'm kind of silly, but when I'm in the middle of a problem that's intractable, it's a siege kind of thing, I'll find a quiet place, because I like this be still part. I'll find a quiet place by myself, and I'll sit down, and I'll actually pull a chair up alongside me. This is the silly part, I think. But I pull up a chair beside me, and I pat it and say, God, will you sit here with me? God goes, yeah, I'm near you. That's just my way of remembering that he's actually there. He's with us. You got to remind yourself he's with us. The Lord of hosts, the one who commands the powers of heaven, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And so I sit on that chair next to the other chair where the King of the universe sits with me and says, what are you facing? And I tell him, and I say, but I feel better now that you're here. I feel better that you are my refuge. I had forgotten. Forgive me. I'm glad that you're my strength. I had forgotten. I'm glad that I'm here in your fortress. I had forgotten. Silly me. I'll put you back to where you are. You're the King of the universe. And you're sitting next to me out of love. That's what conflicts with the world are meant to bring you to. Now, when everything's running fine, I don't do that thing. Because I don't think I need to. I wake up the next day and I go, hey, God, I got this. Today I'm on top of everything. Everything's just fine. I got this. And God says, it'd be nice to, nope, I got this. I'm out there. I'll come back to you when I need you. Here we go. Whoa. And then you start to run up against walls. And then your prayer starts to go like, well, God, I sort of got this, but I don't have this part. So can you do this part? And I'll do this part. And if you just do this part, then I think we'll get there. Am I the only one that does this stupid stuff? Okay, great. There's a few hands. And then finally, when you realize that you don't got any part of the problem, then you finally go into the little room and you pull in the chair. God, I don't got any of this. But I would like to know you more in the midst of this. It's meant to change the dynamic of our relationship with him and to see the dimensions of his love for us. Full stop. That's the end of the psalm. 3 stanzas. I can see why they'd sing this. I would sing this. I would sing this in the midst of troubles. It's perfect. So here's the summary. This is the easy way to look at this. There are 3 stanzas, and the way I remember the 3 stanzas about what I'm supposed to do when I fear is just this simple. The first stanza tells me that I will not fear. And that's life-changing. Well, I will not fear because I'm remembering who God is. That's the core of that. I'll remember who he is, so I will not fear. You can choose to fear past the fear. Don't feed that fear. Feed your knowledge of who he is as the exalted God who loves you, died on your behalf, and has the power above everything in the universe. He's on your side. He's sitting next to you. Oh, well, that changes everything. So I will not fear. You know what my second one is, the second stanza? It's always this. I have a stream. In the midst of this problem, when it looks like there's no source of life, I have a stream. I have a stream that you can't see that gives life, that brings water, that brings health to me in the midst of this. I have a stream, not I have a dream. That's how I remember this. I have a stream. I have a stream that makes the city of God just delight. I have a source of life that in the midst of these conflicts that the people who are afflicting me don't see. I've got a stream and you don't see it. And it's God himself who brings life. And then the third thing, after I will not fear, I won't feed the fear, I have a stream, there's a source of life in the midst of the siege of these problems. And the third and last thing is I'll just be still and know who God is. That's not just a pablum. That's actually a very productive tactic. I will quiet the voices, that's the still, and I'll know. And when I say know, I'm really talking about exalting who God is. I'll put him in his place where he always has been, that I have forgotten. I'll recognize that, and I will still the voices that are tempting me to doubt God's loving kindness toward me. I'll still those voices. I'll sit in the chair. I'll pat the pad and say, God, you're with me, and you're the God of the universe, but look at this. You're sitting with me because you want to be with me in these problems. By the way, when the nation of Israel left Egypt, and they went through that whole thing through the desert, and they're making the way to the promised land, God so many times through that story says over and over again that while we're making this journey, I want to be with you. I want to be in your midst. And they'll come up against a lot of problems. He says, I want to be in your midst, so much so that I want a tent that I will be in while you guys tent in the desert. I'm going to have a tent, and I'm going to be with you, and I'll be with you in the middle of the good and the bad and everything in between. I want to be with you as you go through this problem tour. I'm going to be with you. And so he says, build me a tent, which is called the tabernacle. And when we camp at night, we'll put my tent in the middle, and all the tribes will camp around me, and I'll be with you. And it's God's intention all the way through. I want to be with you. And that's his message to us in the midst of these battles. I'll be still, and I'll know that the God of the universe, who is above and beyond everything you can see and made everything, has the hosts of heaven, is in your midst. Changes the equation. So then I can go back to step 1. Well, I guess I won't fear then. I don't got this. God's got this. And over with the nation of Israel, he says, you know that next battle coming up? It's not your battle. It's my battle. Oh, that's different. This is the kind of God that wants to walk with us through these problems. That's what he's saying. That's what I wish we could sing in Psalm 46. But we read the words, and that's good enough. But we are going to sing this. And sing about the fact that what he wants us to do is to come to him in the midst of these things. Remember, the first step is refuge in him. Where you go, I find refuge in him. And when I find refuge in him, I won't fear. Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this psalm. We thank you for preserving these songs for us. We wish we had melodies, but that's okay. The lyrics bless our socks off. And Lord, forgive us for when we feed our fears instead of finding refuge in you. Lord, teach us through your Spirit. Through your Spirit, teach us how to still the voices of the threats and the problems. Teach us through your Spirit how to sit alongside of you in the midst of the problem and to seek your face and your blessing on us in the midst of the problem. Lord, we are still amazed, as the psalmist says, about the fact that the nearness of God is my good. The nearness of God is my good. It's not the radically transformed circumstances. It's the nearness of God. So, Lord, we pray you draw near to us in the midst of our battles. And many of us here today have ongoing chronic sieges that are afflicting them. So I pray that you would come in a very gracious, near way and sit alongside those who struggle. And in that nearness, bless them with your presence and with the comfort and the peace that comes from knowing that you're there with us. You're not on some other corner of the universe hoping things work out. You are there with us. Forgive us when we run to another refuge other than you, because you are our refuge. You're our strength. You're our fortress. You always have been. We just forget. So thank you for this marvelous psalm in Jesus' name. Amen.